So let me contextualize some things, and I'm going to give you examples, right? So I want us to think about there are differences between being anti racist and also being against anti Blackness. As educators, we are doing a couple of things. We have been consciously or unconsciously, but definitely formally, we're tasked to teach a particular pedagogy and curriculum that ushers in a very specific multicultural white form of nationalism. We see it in our history books. We see it in our political science books. We see it in our English classes. We see it all across our disciplines and subject matters that there is a specific culture and narrative we're ushering in. And it's very multicultural, white, nationalist. Very rarely are we learning about Black liberation movements. Very rarely do we learn about the depth and breadth of an anti Black chattel slavery condition, let alone its history. Very rarely do we talk about the breadth and depth of the anti Indigenous genocidal project that still exists today. That's not a part of our curriculum. In history, poli sci, English classes, that's not what we're teaching. We very rarely do we talk about the United States colonial projects beyond the United States. We don't talk about the breadth of the war in Vietnam, what happened in Laos, what happened in Cambodia, right? Or the Philippines, or Guam, or Hawaii, or Samoa. We don't know these histories. Even when we say the US history or United States, we may talk about Hawaii, but we're not talking about Hawaii as an occupied territory by which Native Hawaiians will vehemently remind you. We don't talk about US states, we don't talk about its territories. Those are occupied lands. That's not in our history, political science, in any of our courses for the most part. So that's what I mean when I say that we have a particular set of values that we're teaching and a particular recollection of this country. So then that's a part of the informal ways that we produce white supremacy. And now we have an increasingly diverse population that we're teaching it to. And a lot of these like multicultural populations, they don't remember their histories. They don't remember how they got here. But we're continuously teaching them how to be good citizens. We're teaching them, how to be really good at STEM without a context by which they're supposed to be really good scientists and mathematicians to continue ushering in this project without context. So those are kind of the day-to-day informal practices of multicultural white nationalist project, right? So then when we talk about discipline, the other hand, right, we have the soft ways of disciplining, and then we also have these more stringent, rigid ways of disciplining and punishing young people. So people talk about the school to prison pipeline, as you referenced. There are many of us who talk about it, schools and prisons as a continuum. And we talk about them as a school to prison continuum under a carceral state, by which, while everyone is subject to surveillance and policing, there are certain populations that are being targeted for premature death and or enclosure or political and social debilitation. That happens through the punitive projects or the punitive policies of suspensions and expulsions, where we see that most of the young people impacted have been Black, Latinx, and Indigenous. So then, we started kind of contending against, these punitive practices, like how dare we suspend these kids? How dare we expel them? How dare we bring in the police to arrest them and punish them, right? That's definite. Yes, stop it. We've also failed to look at the kind of normalized forms of policing that many of us are implicated in doing. That looks like in my research when I was, and I continue to do this research, in my research, I'll find students will tell me they would have gotten in trouble for chewing gum. They would have gotten in trouble and sent out of class. They may have gotten a referral and or they just get sent out of class to stand outside for an hour. That doesn't get documented. Or a student, will come to school late, and predominantly Black youth, Black girls will talk about coming to school late because they're actually taking care of their siblings at home because they're living under conditions by which they're under resourced. So they have to be the second parent. They come to school late, they ask for support from their teachers, and their teachers are asympathetic. That's a form of policing, disciplining. And then they end up getting tardy referrals instead of some compassion. So then we also have incidences of, students who actually intuitively know that their teacher is racist. And I think the way that we've been taught, we've kind of dismissed our young people's intuition under the pretense that it needs to be logical. Like demonstrate to me that that teacher is racist versus young people saying, well, they're not talking to me and they're not looking at me. I can actually tell that they don't like me. We don't, lend any credence to that young person's feeling of being ostracized in the classroom, right? As a type of disciplining. In my research, the young people will say, I had a young person say that teacher doesn't like Black kids, but they don't get a referral for it. They're just like, they don't talk to me. They just don't help me, right? That's not documented as suspension or expulsion. Or, one of my AP students that I interviewed gave an example of how she did an assignment in one of her classes. At the end of class, the teacher pulls her aside and said, this is not your writing. My student, a Black girl, was like, what are you talking about? The teacher says, this is an Asian girl's handwriting. None of that was documented as a suspension or expulsion. Instead, she sends the student to the principal's office with her assignment, and the principal has that girl in real time start writing to compare whether or not that was her writing. These forms of disciplining and policing and punishment are not documented. It's an everyday ritual that the young kids experience. And so that student that I was talking to felt so marginalized, if not attacked in the classroom. She's literally shut down. She wasn't going to drop out of school, right? She's going to stay in school. She's an AP student, but she feels tortured in the school. I'm giving you a handful of examples by which a lot of the young people I spoke to in my research talked about anti-Blackness as a part of the culture they were living in, beyond the referrals, suspensions, and arrests. They're much more mundane and everyday than we are archiving.